Hi, and welcome to Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. Well, we've got a good show for you today. We've got a gentleman who at one point spent some time here in Connecticut and now is a resident of Indiana. He goes by the moniker that he is the foremost and I guess the biggest or only Beatles scholar in the United States of America. And his name is John Krerowicz, not John, Aaron. Okay, I'm thinking of his dad, John. I got it almost right. His dad is the co-author of the book as well, a book called Days in the Life of Father and Son on a Beatle Tour. 2 men, 7 states, 18 days, 12 Beatle presentations. And as far as Aaron Krerowicz, he's lectured extensively on the Beatles and also some other topics as well, which we'll get into during the interview throughout the U.S. and England. This is his 4th book. And Aaron, son of John, welcome to Studio 411.
Well, thank you very much for hosting.
Absolutely. A pleasure to have you here. So now, tell me, first of all, at one point, a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in Connecticut or just went to school here at one point?
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, Kenosha, Wisconsin, okay. And that's where my parents still live. And from there, I entered Butler University in Indianapolis. I did a bachelor's degree in music theory and composition from Butler, graduated 2008. I then moved to Boston. I did a master's at Boston University, graduated 2010. And then I moved to Connecticut in summer of 2010, August of 2010, to start a doctoral program at the Hart School of the University of Hartford. And for a variety of reasons, I never did finish the doctoral program. I essentially downgraded to a second master's and graduated from Hart in 2012.
That's tough, though. I was going to say, most folks would be very envious just to go to those schools, and you're like, well, I had a downgrade, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I started a DMA, Doctor of Musical Arts in Composition, and at some point realized that I guess I was more interested in analyzing Beatles music than I was in writing my own.
Now, I read somewhere that you had kind of an epiphany moment where you all of a sudden, maybe it was a calling, you heard a certain song in a certain locale. Tell us about that.
Sure, yeah, I was when I was a grad student at Boston University, I would commute. I lived in Revere on the North Shore, and I would commute by the Blue Line into the campus. And so I had an awful lot of time to listen to music. And at one particular day, I was listening to the album Magical Mystery Tour. And on comes I Am the Walrus, a song that I've heard hundreds, if not thousands of times previously. But something about that particular listening, it just kind of dawned on me that the Beatles are so much more than just a really good pop group. I mean, they are a really good pop group, but they're a lot more than just that. They are a landmark in music history. And so that that probably was April 2010 or thereabouts. And it was kind of one of those light bulb moments where you realize
the skies opened up, the
the
wind swirled, and you looked up and said, "This is my calling."
Well,
right?
and there's maybe not quite that dramatic, but yes, that's kind of it. And so from there, June of 2011. I made a real conscious decision to study this music, not just listen to it and not just be a fan and appreciate the music, but really dig into it and figure out what makes this music work, what makes it tick. And to that end, I applied for a research grant through the University of Hartford to do that. And so I won this research grant in November 2011, and the grant was to write my first book, The Beatles and the Avant-Garde, and that came out in November 2014. So it took me about 3 years to do all the research and digest it all and put it into book form. So that was what the grant was really for, was for that first book. Now since then I've taken it to rather extensive levels beyond what the grant was designed for, and to the point where last year, 2015, I actually quit all my jobs so that I could do this Beatles stuff full time.
And actually, you and I connected because I contacted you about a lecture you did, I believe it was somewhere here in Connecticut, if not the Northeast for sure, about baseball, old-time baseball. And then
Yeah.
you said to me, well, that's good, but we could maybe do something. But, really, then you kind of filled me in on all the extensive Beatle and Beatle-themed type of books and presentations that you're doing. And I
Yeah.
said, well, there you go. We'll start there.
Yeah, baseball's always been a hobby of mine. I mean, since I was a little kid, I've been a Cubs fan. And the Cubs are now in the World Series.
My
So
goodness.
this is perfect for me. But it's always been a hobby. The Beatles are really my area of professional expertise. That's where I'm making original contributions and original analysis. And baseball is kind of a glorified hobby that I do on the side.
What was impressive with that caught my eye was, even with the Beatles stuff, obviously you were born in the mid-'80s, correct?
Right, 85.
So obviously, I think people are initially, I'm sure, impressed saying, well, he wasn't even around during the British invasion, during the whole 6, 7, 8 years, depending on when you ruled the beginning or end of the Beatles' initial era. But what I found fascinating going back to the old-time baseball was that was like real historian type of digging and research that goes into that, because now you're talking in some cases over 100 years.
Right.
Because you took it beyond even 1873, which is when Spalding or Doubleday or whoever it was that really came up allegedly with baseball in the game. So I found that great.
Yeah,
so,
well, that program actually ended with the Civil War. So it was looking at baseball prior to the Civil War.
Which I'm looking at that. I'm saying I didn't even know that existed. So that's why at some point, yes, we will be talking about that. We'll incorporate that.
Yeah.
What the boys did when they weren't fighting each other here in the glorious U.S. Oh my goodness. Let's see now. Why the Beatles and not some other band? Like, for instance, I saw a great thing recently on the Dave Clark Five, and all of a sudden how underrated they have been.
Yes.
It's a silly question in a way, because obviously the Beatles are really the cream of the crop. But seriously, were there other bands that then you found yourself appreciating more as well, and not necessarily to do a book or a project about, but that you said, wow, okay, now it is a whole movement that went on here in this country in the mid-'60s.
Yeah, certainly the Beatles are one of, if not the leaders of 1960s rock. Dylan has to be thrown in that category as well and several others. Dave Clark Five could fit in there as well. So it's not that the Beatles are the only musical innovators of their time, but I would say that the Beatles are the leading innovators of their time. Yeah. And so the music of the Beatles, I've often said the music of the Beatles nicely balances accessibility with sophistication, because it's so easy to listen to. And that ease of listening belies just how complicated, how complex the music is. And when you look at the things that the Beatles did, the chord progressions that they used, or the different tonal structures that they implemented, it goes way beyond the music of, say, Elvis Presley. And I like Elvis Presley. Sure. I'm not dissing Elvis Presley. I'm just saying his music tended to be quite simple. And the Beatles' music, in contrast, is very sophisticated. And so I would say the Beatles are the leading innovators of their time, because their music is so sophisticated, but at the same time so accessible and so easy to approach and engage with.
There you go. Aaron Krerowicz joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book co-authored with his dad, John, a former newspaperman who worked for over 35 years with the Kenosha News in Wisconsin. The book is Days in the Life, Father and Son on a Beatles Tour. We've got a shot here if the crew can show that. I thought that was interesting. You with a portrayal of, I guess, a statue of Eleanor Rigby.
That's her.
Yeah, and a great song. Now, even though Lennon and McCartney obviously had I guess a contractual pact that they were made to sign, so I believe that each song would be Lennon and McCartney. Now, as you listen to the music over the years, those of us that remember it from back then, Eleanor Rigby strikes me as more of a Paul-themed song.
Very much so.
And when I say he was more deep to me. Not that John wasn't, but clearly, even in the early days when they met, Paul was much more a up-and-coming musician, and I think his writing skills were superior. I mean, I think they found a good mesh.
Yeah, it's tough to describe it in terms who's better or worse.
Yeah.
It's so subjective. But I will say that Paul tends to start with music and adds lyrics to that music, where John tends to start with lyrics and then adds music to the lyrics.
Okay.
Did I say that right? I
Yes,
think I did.
yes. Well,
So-
because he was, at least in films that I've seen, he was kind of the wannabe poet, so that would make sense. That
Well, he was more literary than
yeah.
Paul was.
Yeah.
And that's why Paul, at the end of Hey Jude, can just sing na 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 na. He doesn't need lyrics,
Right.
Because the lyrics aren't what's important. What's important is the music, and any lyrics that he assigns to those melodies are not. I don't want to say they're unimportant, but they're secondary to the music. In contrast, when John writes music, he'll often start with lyrics, and thus his melodies that he adds to those lyrics tend to be quite compact and very few different notes. So, for example, on Come Together, John sings, "Here come old flat top, he come grooving up slowly, he got a juju eyeball." It's 3 notes that he sings over and over again, because the melody is less important than the lyrics. The music is the vehicle through which he puts forth his lyrical and literary ambitions. Now, that is slightly oversimplified. There are, of course, exceptions to that rule. And it's not to say that one is any better than the other, but it is to point out that Paul leaned more towards the musical side, where John leaned more towards the lyrical side.
Right, but as a partnership, those two fused together for several years, worked extremely well.
Right.
And obviously...
To quote one of my friends, Matthew Blick, who's the genius behind the Beatles Songwriting Academy, as he calls it, he says it's not Lennon or McCartney, it's not Lennon versus McCartney, it's Lennon and McCartney.
Sure.
Because it's the two of them together that really helps define the music of that decade.
To digress a minute from I was going to talk about the book with your dad, but while you bring that up, what would you say if you had to pick one post-Beatle Lennon and or one post-Beatle McCartney song, not in terms of record sales or airplay, whatever, but in terms of just what you would consider an epic or classic song? Obviously,
Sure.
a lot of people would say Imagine.
Well, that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah, but I mean, any others of his, or what would you say, McCartney's crowning achievement if the Beatles had never happened?
That's
I know
interesting.
that's hard to envision.
Wow, yeah. And I have to admit, I don't know the solo career
Yeah.
stuff nearly as well as I know the Beatles, years recordings. But
I know, like My Love, a lot of people, they think that's, tremendous, McCartney doing Maybe I'm Amazed.
Maybe I'm Amazed is probably the
Band
one I
on
would
the Run,
pick.
but I mean, there's also so many little nuggets throughout, and
Yeah.
that sometimes you go, oh my goodness, I haven't heard that song in years. Now, Lennon, I remember the Imagine LP, and Imagine is a great song, and it still continues to influence people. But frankly, I think it got to a point where, for someone who grew up listening to it, it just was vastly overplayed. To where now if I don't hear it for years, I don't.
It's okay,
miss it.
right.
Yeah, but there were other songs like Instant Karma.
Sure.
There were other tracks from the Imagine album that I just thought, like Woman or. Jealous Guy.
Sure.
I mean, just tremendous tunes.
Yeah, the one that's coming to my mind as we're talking is Look at Me.
Okay, not familiar
and
with
I
that.
think that one is on Plastic Ono Band.
Okay.
But look at me, what am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be? And it's very confessional. I mean, it's very intimate music. He's really putting, emotions and a lot of his own personal anxieties and vulnerabilities into his music. And so there's a certain raw character. I mean, it's a very gentle song, but at the same time, it's so confessional and revealing that I think it makes for a very compelling song and underrated song. It's nowhere near played as often as Imagine or
Right, and I think in Lennon's case, I think because there was a lot of angst, turmoil, inner things
Inner
going
demons.
on. Demons, thank you
Yeah.
very much. as opposed to Paul. I mean, Paul had this, Linda,
silly love songs,
and the farm up in Scotland,
right.
and the sheep and the whole thing.
Yeah,
You just got the impression that John, with all the causes and everything he was taking on, and of course he had his own visa issues, whatever. I mean, Nixon was trying to, nail him to the wall. I just think this was a guy that was really, it's probably too strong a word, but I think really tormented. But it did come out in his music.
Oh yeah, in many songs. Look at Me is one of many.
Yeah.
Mother off the same
Oh
album.
yeah, oh yeah.
I mean there's a lot of personal angst and demons.
Oh, and even later, and I think that's why then, in my opinion, I think at one point, maybe when he kind of found a little happiness, he finally, his
house husband phase.
Yes, that he took a break, and all of a sudden I think that he almost needed that, In 2016, I finally got around to seeing the Ron Howard movie, 8 Days a Week.
But it just
any
came
thoughts
out
on that?
last month.
Did you think? What'd you think of that?
I saw it opening night in Springfield, Missouri, of all places, and I was there doing these tours, and a guy who helped coordinate the tour invited me to go to this premiere of 8 Days a Week. So of course I said, yeah, I'd love to go hang out with a bunch of Beatles fans, and I thought Ron Howard did a really good job with it. I call myself a Beatles music scholar, and as a scholar, I try to be a little more detached. I try to be a little more objective, and I thought Ron Howard did a really good job of portraying the emotional connection and emotional meaning that fans attach to this band and their music. There was a scene where Whoopi Goldberg was interviewed about her mom surprising her with tickets to the Shea Stadium concert.
Great, yeah.
And you could, I mean, the emotion behind it was palpable. You knew how much this meant to her, and it's something that I, as a scholar, try to consciously avoid. I don't think about emotional connections as I'm analyzing chord progressions and dissecting song structures and all that kind of more analytic and rational things that I do. So I really appreciated the emotional depth of the film, because it's not something that I actually think about a whole lot. So that was new to me.
Some people or articles that I read, reviews thought that, the movie was too long. But again, my opinion on that was that what you were watching was not only a piece of history, but it was a historical film. Even without the Shea Stadium thing, which was cool because I had never seen that in color. I saw it when it was released years ago on ABC in black and white, or at least we had a black and white set in those days. But it was just fascinating to see that, and to me, I could have sat there for another 2 hours.
You and me both, right?
And I was telling someone recently, we were talking about how, for instance, when you see a portrayal, let's say, of like Jackie Robinson's struggle, or the civil rights movement, or the Civil War story, anything where it's based on historical fact, and all of a sudden you feel for those people or that person.
And it puts you in that context.
But what I always find is that, and I'll use Jackie Robinson, for instance, that people say, oh my goodness, what he had to go through. To me, in movies, whether they're biographical or whatever, that it is only 1/10 or 1/100th as bad as what you see in the film. And conversely, the frenzy, the Beatlemania that you saw from that movie, to me, I'll say 20%. Someone of your generation, or even now millennials, that would have no way of knowing
personal experience with
even watching that, still wouldn't grasp, and even I could say that of myself. I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, so it wasn't like I was going to an airport or a concert or whatever. But still, I mean, you could just feel it, that what was going on,
the magnitude of it all.
Exactly. And I think that as good a job as he did, young people that have, and future people that will see it will say, wow, I guess that's great. But we live in a society too, I think, where people aren't impressed that readily. I don't know why. I think their senses are dulled, but to watch that and not come away with some sort of, wow, this was like not only a crazy time, but it was an influential time for so many reasons, not just the Beatles themselves.
That reminds me of a YouTube video. If you go on YouTube and search, kids react to the Beatles. They show like all the footage of fans screaming and to these like 9-year-olds.
Oh, I've seen that.
You've seen that. It's quite amusing.
Oh yeah, and it's great to see. But unfortunately, maybe they're at an age where they're still impressionable, or I was actually impressed with how verbally skilled and intelligent those young people were.
They were quite witty.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I don't know. I don't always think that's the case with most. All right, we are talking Beatles and all sorts of good stuff here on Studio 411. Aaron Krerowicz, author of Days in the Life, a father and son on a Beatles tour, co-authored with his dad, John. We'll talk a little bit about the book now. In March of 2016, you and your dad were traveling, I guess, on doing presentations, lectures, etc., through Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, New Mexico, and places I've maybe forgotten, and then decided, hey, let's take our notes and let's write a book. So is that kind of, did you plan on doing it from the start, or did it kind of evolve as you went along?
Both. I typically will post a blog the day before one of my presentations. So for example, tomorrow I'm doing a presentation down in Middletown on the music of Star Wars. So this afternoon I posted a blog advertising that. And I do a little preview. This, if you come, this is what you're going to see, but a lot more of it. So I typically blog about my programs the day before they actually happen. And so when we started this trip in March, I was doing that anyway. But I made, before the trip ever happened, I made a conscious effort to write a little bit more than I might otherwise have, to go on for longer and get into more depth and more detail than I might have otherwise, because I knew that we were considering turning those blogs into a full book. And so you can go back. I mean, if you go on my website and find my blog and look up March 2016, you can find the original blogs. And what we did was we took those blogs and expanded them greatly, probably at least double what we originally wrote for the actual book. We had to restructure and reorganize and expand parts and contract, these paragraphs or whatever the case may be. And so through many months of revisions, we came up with the finished product.
Nice. There you go. No, that's great. And I think you're seeing that more and more. Obviously, a different way to come up with book ideas, or actually kind of put the thoughts together, is that people are doing that. We sometime, hopefully in the future, have a gentleman on who's scaled the Appalachian Trail, Cheshire native, whose name escapes me right now. But anyway, and he took a series of news articles back in the day before there were computer blogs, and then expounded on it some 20 plus years later.
Oh wow!
With things maybe he had forgotten about or wanted to talk about in relation to the trail as it is now, and then as well. And just, again, so a different approach, but obviously necessitated, because in those days you didn't have,
there were no blogs.
Media outlets you have now, for good, bad, or indifferent. So, tell me a little bit about, I know it's online, I believe, the Beatles, and speaking of which, online, for more information on Aaron and all that he is doing and has to say, aaronkrerowicz.com. That's AARONKREROWICZ.
That's a mouthful. It might be easier just to do a Google search for Aaron Beatles Scholar,
there
and I'll
you go.
be the first
all
one.
Right. All right. And tell me, on there, I believe, is the Beatles Minute. And now, what is? How did that come about? And give me an example of, let's say, an average Beatle minute, or one that comes to mind.
Yeah, well, I got the idea. I've been toying with a podcast for some time, and part of the problem why I haven't done one is because they take a whole lot of work to produce like an hour podcast.
No.
And so I have no problem doing work, because it's fun work, it's engaging work, I like doing it. But I thought, well, what if I do just like a little brief thing? Instead of an hour, what if I do just 1 minute? So that gives me, it's kind of like Twitter. I don't know if you use Twitter much, but they limit you to, 120 characters, whatever it is. So you have to be very economical in what you choose to say because you're limited. And so it kind of fires creativity. You have to find ways to say what you want within the confines of a single tweet. And I thought that was, I think that's quite smart of Twitter to do that. Anyway, so I took the same idea and said, well, what if I limit myself to 1 minute? I have to say something significant in just 1 minute time. Now, I am flexible. Sometimes I go a minute and a half,
But now this is an actual, like, in other words, little video that you post, or, okay.
Right. So I write the script, I read the script and record the script. I edit all the clips and I put all the examples into this little thing, and it has to be, a minute, maybe 2 at most. So very brief idea. So earlier we were talking about Eleanor Rigby. One of the Beatles Minutes I have is called Eleanor Rigby's Ghost. And it talks about how lyrically the first verse is all about the title character, Eleanor Rigby herself. Second verse is all about Father Mackenzie, the Reverend, who separate character. The third verse then brings them together. But of course it's a tragedy. It's too late because Eleanor Rigby's dead before the two of them come together. And then musically representing that, there are 2 different pieces of music. One is the refrain. I hope I get this right. I'm going from memory. So, all the lonely people, where do they all belong? And the other one is, look at all the lonely people. And those 2 things are heard separately in the first parts of the song, but then at the end, they're brought together.
Right.
Much like these characters are brought together, so too musically, these 2 themes are brought together. But when they're put together, the look at all the lonely people is missing the harmony. The first time, a couple times we hear that, we hear melody and harmony. The last time, we only hear melody. So it's as if Eleanor Rigby's spirit remains, but her body, physical body, is gone. So it's like Eleanor Rigby's ghost is there at the end of the track. So this Beatles Minute video on Eleanor Rigby's ghost is going through what I just said, but with musical examples to illustrate what makes the song so, part of what makes the song so compelling and musically sophisticated, and bringing music together just as the lyrics bring the characters together.
Now, using that in that song, if I recall, I want to say, I think it was recorded in '65, was released in '66. I think it was a B.
I don't know when it was recorded, but it was released in
B-side, or wasn't it? Was it a B-side of Yellow Submarine, or vice versa?
I think that's right. I think it was the B-side of Yellow Submarine.
What do you think, using that song as an example, and they talked about a little bit in the movie, was that just happenstance? Was that, 4 guys that really kind of, were more musically scholared than we give them credit for, or was it a combination of things, and also their producer, George Martin?
You mean who's responsible
for
Eleanor
for
Rigby's
so
ghost?
many of these things that I've read that you talk about, and it is almost, I didn't hear the Everly Brothers do it. I didn't hear Buddy Holly do it.
Well, that's
I didn't hear Elvis do it. I mean, so all of a sudden, is it that we're just, not you yourself, but so many throughout the years are really dissecting their music and not doing that with others? Was Chuck Berry doing more than just a duck walk? Or well, there's your next book, Film at 11. There we go.
With all those 50s rock and rollers, all these guys who inspired the Beatles, the music is great, but it really is quite simple. And, the Beatles make the music far more sophisticated than Chuck Berry. Berry had very sophisticated lyrics, but musically he tends to use 3 chords, and that's great. He doesn't need more than 3 chords. The Beatles, however, do need more than 3 chords. Although Eleanor Rigby only uses 2, E minor and C major, and that's it throughout the entire song. Anyway, it's a tough call as to how conscious these guys were of what they were doing. Because a lot of the times, I suspect it was conscious. I think they had an idea and they went with it. They worked with it, and that's what we hear in the finished product. But I think just as often, it's a subconscious thing. They're not consciously aware. They're not trying to say, oh, here's this idea, let's explicitly do this idea in a song. They're just writing the best songs that they can.
Sure.
But as they become more mature and sophisticated in their songwriting and their recording, we start finding this type of thing. And it's part of what makes the Beatles and study of their music so compelling, is that there's an endless wealth of information and endless riches to their body of work. And no matter how much you know the Beatles and how much you've studied them, there is always something new to find. And that's what makes it so rewarding to study their music. I just had a guy yesterday, I did a program up in Southwick, Massachusetts, and he came up to me afterwards and said, I thought I knew everything there was to know about the Beatles. And you talked about all these new things that I'd never even thought of.
All above the surface, you know what I'm saying? In other words, you take it to another level, and those that are interested in digging, I mean,
right, you have to dig to find it.
To a slightly, layer beneath, but I mean,
Yeah.
you go like, you're like a rock specialist. You go down to the core, what I mean? And even then you're saying you're finding, like endless stuff to, and some of it, unfortunately, there are no answers,
Well, that's true.
I'm saying there's always that, maybe, or either there really is nobody that can remember, or, and of course, as the years go on, eventually then there won't be anybody to really talk about, but then hopefully through, writings or recordings or tapes. Again, that's why that Ron Howard movie was so fascinating.
Yeah.
I thought I had seen every clip of them on a television show.
Right.
And there were stuff from Germany, Sweden, and I can't even remember. There was one. Here I am waiting for Shindig, and I'm waiting for Sullivan, and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, wait a minute, okay, there was some of that, but no, others there were not. And I think that was either a conscious decision to say, you know what, we've unearthed something that no one has seen, and that's why I was a little kind of befuddled at the the criticisms about we don't like the movie, or the movie's too long. I'm like, you people kidding me? This is like an AP course you're watching,
right?
Here, So anyway.
But yeah, the more you dig, the more you find.
Yeah,
and that's not necessarily the case for other groups.
Aaron Krerowicz joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book Days in the Life, a Father and Son on a Beatle Tour, co-authored with his dad, John. Favorite Beatle? Again, I know these are simplistic questions. But again, we all talk about it, whether we were 5 or 50 or whatever.
Well, and that's a question I get asked almost every day.
But let me turn it around. I was thinking of this. Least favorite Beatle. Forget favorite Beatle.
Oh,
least favorite Beatle.
Wow.
I mean, based on either input or lack thereof. I mean, we could always say Ringo, but Ringo had a certain...
Oh, I love Ringo.
Yeah, Ringo was cool.
Well, my standard answer to the favorite Beatle question is the politically correct one. They're all great in their own way. But as far as least favorite, wow.
I mean, there's so many criteria that,
Can I say Pete Best?
Oh, okay, there you go. No, here's one. Okay, no, we'll go with that.
Okay.
Love Me Do. I heard recently that there are, I know definitely 3 versions of Love Me Do, possibly 4. Are you aware of that? Okay.
Well, I know of 2 different versions.
There's a mono version.
Oh,
There's a stereo version. So I'm not going to say 5 because obviously these people played on either or. But there has to be a third, either mono or a stereo, whatever, because one of them Ringo played on.
Right.
And or played the tambourine.
Yep.
Another one, Pete Best, I think, is on the track, because if you ever listen closely, and it's hard because depending on whether it's AM or FM, the tracks are slightly different sounding if you really pay attention. I just noticed this about a month ago. And then there was a guy named, I think it was Alan White, that is the drummer on the at least 3rd version of Love Me Do, and my head was exploding. I'm like, I can't tell the difference. I can't tell the difference.
Yeah, if you compare them side by side, there are subtle differences, and it's the tambourine, like you mentioned.
Besides just the mono and the stereo, which again most folks aren't even paying attention.
Yeah, including me.
Yeah,
a lot of people ask me, mono, stereo, which do you prefer? To me,
well, I had a colleague in the not too distant past that he got, and I know I'm going to get it wrong. It's the they call it almost like the diamond version. It's the ultra, like most precise extraction of sound that you can get, and he dubbed me a copy of the Beatles. No, that's the word I'm using. In other words, it's like beyond stereo. It's almost like beyond quadraphonic. And he was telling me, my God, it's like you've never heard their music like this. And I'm thinking,
Really?
you know what, it's okay. I can just listen to it in its a rare
Yeah.
form, purest form. I don't
Yeah.
need to go digging beneath the surface.
Right. Now, the different takes and things, that I find really interesting. But like the mono versus the stereo versus quadraphonic or whatever
Yeah.
else, it's not really my thing. A lot of people love that, and that's great, but it's really not my thing.
Least favorite Beatles song?
Oh, yeah. There's one by George. Sorry, George.
The one
you
with
like me too much.
Is that the one with the excessive sitar that just goes on forever?
Oh, no, I don't mind that.
No, there's one on either Magical Mystery Tour or whatever, and it's just like, wow. I mean, it's like I'm ODing on that Ravi Shankar.
No, I see. I can handle that. That's
one
not a problem.
One of my favorite Beatles songs is "You Know My Name, Look Up My Number."
That's one of Paul's favorite too, actually.
It is a train wreck of a track, but
it's hilarious.
it is like a comedy bit, like.
It's a Goons routine via Beatles.
I was just going to say, Peter Sellers and his cronies back in the late 50s.
That's exactly what they were conscious. That's what they were imitating.
Yeah,
all the different,
amazing.
all the falsetto voices and.
Now, question for you. I know this is one that's puzzled me, and I'm going to say it's Paul, but I'm not sure.
Uh-oh.
The one that plays does the captain in Yellow Submarine, and then
that's John.
That is John, and then goes at the end. That is John.
And the silly voices in the last verse. Ringo sings the melody, and then John parrots it back. So
it is. See, I thought it was all these years. It was Paul. You see what I'm saying? There's never an end to the knowledge that you can get from this.
And there's always debate.
And you're just fostering it, traveling the world over, talking about it. Aaron Krerowicz joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. The book Days in the Life of Father and Son on a Beatle Tour, co-authored with his dad John. We're looking at a shot there of the Beatles, an old Post magazine cover. If the guys in the crew can get that up, that's a pretty good looking shot there of the guys looking kind of dapper.
Yeah, with those hats.
Cross
and the canes.
Looking almost like an old TV show called The Rogues, where they all wore the top hats and the canes. How many different presentations do you give? Again, now we talked about the baseball. You talked about Star Wars.
Yep.
You talk about even where you mix in kind of the JFK into the Beatles thing. I mean, what other ones am I missing?
Yeah, well, I've got 35
Or what others
total.
are you working on, I should say, too?
Sure. Yeah, I've got quite a few total. Most of them are on the Beatles. More than half are on the Beatles. And they range. I mean, the most popular one is called Band of the Sixties, and we started in 1960 when the Quarrymen changed their name to the Beatles. There were many name changes, but that's when the Beatles are really. That's when the name happens, and then we go through 1970 when they break up, and so it's just a step-by-step evolution of this band from their formative years in Hamburg through their breakup after Abbey Road and Let It Be. And that's by far the most popular. I've done that one, 180 times or something like that. And then I've got several more. I've got the one on John Kennedy, looking at Kennedy's assassination and the Beatles' meteoric rise a few months later. Is there a relationship there or not? I just did that one this morning, actually, in Bloomfield.
And that was in this country, obviously, both the Kennedy and the rise, but that movie brought it out even more clear than even I imagined.
Yeah.
In England, 63, they were already like tearing it up. I mean,
yeah.
It was like, it was off the charts.
Yeah.
And just like Dave Clark 5, then, I saw a great HBO documentary about them too, to digress for a moment. But again, they were also, they got their start by doing a lot of Air Force and Army bases and playing for a lot of Americans. And, and these guys were always gigging much more, I think, even than the Beatles did. I mean, the Beatles did a lot of those smaller clubs until they hit it big. But yeah, it was just, that time was it was just waiting to explode. And of course, then I think we were as a nation just looking for something, because of this horrific, especially leading into the Thanksgiving holiday and then the Christmas holiday. I mean, again, I was, in kindergarten or first grade, so probably I'd be lying if I said I totally understood the magnitude of it.
Right.
And one thing I do remember, and you're free to use this, but again, it was that I remember going to church on a Sunday, and it was the Sunday of the funeral, JFK, and I remember we walked home, and it was, a good mile or two that we were walking. Mom in those days still, for whatever reason, didn't drive, and it was just like you could hear a pin drop, you know, in the city that I was living in, and it was just, you know, and it just hit me. I'm a 5-year-old kid, and why would I think that? Because it was almost like you were like in a time freeze.
Yeah.
You know, the grief, the remorse, the just shock waves that were going, and then you walk down and we walked and walked. It was just like this, like if nobody was moving, no cars, no nothing, you know. So I just, you know, and then they helped kind of, you know, get everybody, said, look, you know, we got to, in their own way. They didn't go out of their way to say, look, we've got to, you know, you've got to shake it off, people. I mean, they probably had no idea, other than knowing JFK had passed. They had no true understanding. I mean, in England, they you know, I mean, they had their thing with the coming back from World War II, which a lot of people don't realize what depression they went through in
a lot worse than the States.
Oh yeah, in post-World War. I mean, that's one of the reasons even Churchill got eventually booted, was because, you know, people were like, oh, well, you did that, but how come we're all like in a recession here? Well, you know, hey,
it's going to take a long time to get over that.
A lot of rebuilding. Just like it took a long time for us to get over when the Beatles broke up. Now, tell me, Aaron, was it Yoko's fault?
Well, she's known as the woman who broke up the Beatles, and that's much more fan animosity projected onto her.
The Black Spider, as some would call her.
or witch, or worse.
Yes.
But no, I mean, someone once asked me if the Beatles broke up because they ran out of gas. And I said, no, they had plenty of gas in the tank. They were just 4 different drivers in 4 different cars, going down 4 different roads at 4 different speeds to 4 different destinations. They had plenty of creative energy left. It's just they were no longer functioning as a single band, as a single entity. They were all 4, had their own individual ideas, and they were all good ideas. But that, I think, is a far bigger factor in the band's breakup than Yoko. They would have broken up even if Yoko had never came on the scene.
I mean, one I can think of was obviously George's desire to, you know, not just have one. I think later on he might have had 2 on the White Album, but that was a double album, if my memory serves.
Right.
But one track, you know, and of course he, you know, again, had a wealth of material. I always loved George's stuff, even when he did,
especially the later stuff.
Yeah, but even his early stuff when he was doing other people's songs, like he loved Carl Perkins.
Oh yeah,
he loved Carl Perkins. There's even a tribute CD I have of Carl Perkins with special guests.
Yeah,
and he and George do a number together. But when he did, and they played a clip from one of those obscure European gigs. Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and I just love that song. You know, and Matchbox and Ringo, okay, when he did Act Naturally, you know. I'm thinking, okay, am I overthinking it, or how did someone pick that nugget out? It's an old Buck Owens song. Buck Owens recorded for Capitol Records. So somebody along the way said, well, you know, that was a good country hit for Buck. You know, we could use some more money, and it is a Capitol recording, so why don't we...
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, and it fit him perfectly.
It does, yeah.
You know, and
Ringo was the most country of the 4 too. I mean, they all liked country music, but especially Ringo. There's an anecdote of Ringo when he was roughly 17 or 18 or so, writing to the Houston, Texas Chamber of Commerce, asking for a job because he loved Westerns and he wanted to go and hang out with cowboys and live in the wild, wild West. So thank goodness he didn't emigrate to Texas, because music history would likely be very different had he done so. But that's Ringo. He loved the wild, wild West, and he wanted to, you know, sing country songs and hang out with cowboys all day.
Now, just so I have it right, I think I butchered it at the beginning of the opening. You claim to be the United States of America's...
I'm the only full-time Beatles music scholar, meaning I focus on the music as opposed to biography and history. Now, I love biography and history too. My Kennedy thing is all about history, but my primary emphasis is as a music analyst. I analyze music. I break down songs into chord progressions and patterns and melodies and song structures, and that's what differentiates me from all the other Beatles experts out there who are experts in history.
There you go. Let's see now. Now this the book here with your dad. That is your 4th book.
Yes.
And again now, obviously this was a little different in the sense that it was kind of a compilation of the blogs and joint too. So 50-50 kind of splitting the workload.
Yes.
But again, do you find that I would think as you do more and more of these books, I would think that they will become even larger in scope. Or am I
Yes.
wrong there? Yeah.
That's my next project is an encyclopedia of structure in Beatles songs. So it's looking at verses and bridges and choruses and solos and introductions and codas and how they all fit together to create the Beatles' music. The ultimate goal of that study is to understand how and why the Beatles chose to present their music in the way that they did, because that's what structure is. That's how you present the music. And so it's, I go song by song, all 211 officially recorded and released tracks between 63 and 70, and I analyze the structure on a large scale, small scale, and micro scale, looking at the different phrases, and it's very extensive, it's very dry, it's very academic, which is different from the types of books that I've done so far. And it's a reference text. You're not supposed to read it cover to cover. That would be amazingly tedious to read it
So
one
when
page
you
at
do
a
a
time.
presentation on that, and if I come to see it, you'll be like, okay, you'll be treating us more as students, saying, okay,
Well,
open up the book to page 4 and let's analyze Eleanor Rigby.
Well, I've
Although
given
you
that
did very
program
well with that,
once.
because that is, when I say a simple one to
Yeah.
dissect, no, it isn't. Because again, I don't think most of us would make those connections.
Right.
But the way you discussed it, it is you're to be commended, because you do make it seem almost very easy to understand. For
Well, I
the
try to
average.
make
Sure.
it as easy to digest as possible.
And then when you said that, especially with the chorus near the end, then I said, oh, and I'm replaying it in my head as you were saying that. I'm thinking, oh yeah, he's right. But again, to go back to that point, how much credit or not credit does George Martin deserve for?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I really think that I know they say great things about him all the time. I just, words cannot express the magnitude, in my opinion, of what this man meant to them.
Yeah, he deserves a lot of credit, because none of the Beatles had any sort of formal musical training or education. They were self-taught. And so George, having had extensive experience, and he went to the Guildhall School of Music in London. He was well educated, so he provides a certain polish. John and Paul and George bring in these raw, intuitive songs, and George goes a long way towards polishing those raw, intuitive songs into commercially viable and artistically successful products. But George also deserves a lot of credit for knowing when not to step in and help, for knowing when to let John and Paul work their magic completely on their own. Because in music, the notes you play are just as important as the notes you don't play, right? The notes are as important as the rests. And George Martin knows, he's able to strike that balance. He knows somehow when he should step in and help out, and when he should just take a hands-off approach and let them do their thing. So he deserves credit for both of those things.
Yeah, no, he went on to, matter of fact, it was funny, we both simultaneously were thinking about, the Peter Sellers and I think it was
Goons.
Harry Seacombe and the other goons that were comedy troupe that was
Spike Mulligan.
Spike Mulligan, thank you. And then George Martin actually produced their albums in the
he
late
worked with
50s, early 60s. So, I mean, this man wasn't just some stuffy producer with,
Right.
Vitalis hair and a thin tie. I mean, he was a very learned man, and his son Gilles, if I'm pronouncing it right, is...
I've always said Giles. I don't know.
Helped to do the Vegas Beatles Love thing, which was, I hear, is tremendous. And then George went on to produce, I've had the pleasure to talk to these gentlemen after a concert, America, for several years. I mean, I think their first 7 or 8 LPs were all George Martin. And
I didn't know.
Oh yeah, they had tremendous success, and countless others that I'm just blanking on now.
Well, he's one of the great producers of all time.
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
Passed away, unfortunately, in 2016. So
March of this year. In fact, it was as we were on our trip.
Yeah.
So there's one of the sections in here where I do talk about that. Yeah, March 9th.
Yeah.
So the Beatles' legendary producer George Martin died yesterday at the age of 90. So it happened while we were on this trip.
Yeah, see, I lost track of the years, but yeah, he lived a good life, absolutely. Aaron Krerowicz joining us here in the remaining moments of Studio 411. Larry Dasilva joining you for the hour, and we've got a shot there if the crew can get that. I think it was the cover of one of the Christmas kind of bootleg compilations. I think it's cool because it shows, the guys in different states of early years.
Right.
Of course, we might say there might be two Pauls there, because of course there was always the beginning in '69 the rumor that
Paul is dead.
there were
Oh, yes.
Paul is dead, and
Right.
I remember there was a I don't know if you ever heard this. There was F. Lee Bailey hosted a syndicated special, delving into whether. This is the same man who later was on the OJ team.
Oh, I heard about this. In
Yes.
fact, I think I have it on
Yes.
CD.
Oh, it
Yeah.
was. I don't know. I thought it was kind of a train wreck, because I'm sitting there like, are you people kidding me?
Right.
But it just, no one could come up with this.
Yeah.
As you said, they did things that were so ahead of their time, and then I think people either didn't understand it or saw beyond what they were doing, and then took it way out of proportion.
Yep.
To where they created this, Paul is dead, and the cover of which album was it? Was it Abbey Road?
Oh,
the
Paul's
license plate
barefoot.
on the VW
Oh, yes.
28 if.
Right.
And countless other the way he was dressed, doing the crosswalk.
Right. Yeah.
John is in white. George is the grave digger. I don't know what Ringo. Ringo was just looking to get the gig over with.
But yeah, it's a bunch of nonsense, is really what it is.
Another thing too I liked in the 8 Days a Week movie was I hadn't seen as much of it as they showed. Was of course very underrated gentleman, Billy Preston, who was known as the fifth Beatle, very popular and later a successful musician, songwriter in his own right. But again, it just great sound. I mean, and he was
phenomenal keyboard player.
Don't Let Me Down, Get Back. I mean, those keyboard riffs and things you hear. Organ riff. Again, it might have been a Moog organ. I forget right now. But again, just outstanding. Nice to see him on there. So it was good. We got a shot there of course, I think anybody 100,000 years from now would see that and would know instantly who those people are. If not, then you know what? Then
They're lost.
they'll say, what are these guys talking about? They'll still be showing this episode, by the way, back then. So
Yeah, right.
we'll be like, boy, he looks pretty good for 10,003. So, but no, let's see, Paul, John, George, and Ringo. All right, very good, very good. 1964, at least in this country, a big year. But as we said earlier, '63 really was the breakthrough
In England,
year
yeah.
in England. Yeah, and of course, all of Europe really. I mean, because they really were in tune with what was going on there. So. All right, well, we're going to wrap things up. Aaron, I appreciate it, especially you did us a big favor on short notice. We got him. We knew he was in the area, came into the studio, because now you live in Middle America, Indiana, yeah, the middle as they call it. And also, I'll throw a little plug here, CD Odds and Ends. Again, you can find out more about that at aaronkadovich.com for more information on all of Aaron's goings and comings. And again, thank you very much for taking time out to be with us.
Well, thank you for hosting, and I'm glad it worked out.
Absolutely. Hang in there. We thank you folks for joining us here on this episode. Again, the book, too, co-authored with his dad, John, Days in the Life, a Father and Son on a Beatle Tour. And we thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Studio 411. Larry Dasilva wishing you a great day, and we will see you next time. Take care.